Hi there, it's Matt with Grass Stains here. I'm going to show you guys a couple of quick tips about planting today. We're here on the tail end of like the best ideal planting season, either early spring or early and late fall is going to be your ideal time to plant, but we do plant year round unless it's 100+ degrees weather, 90-degree weather, and certainly each plant does matter what you're planting. So I'm going to give you some advice and tips, some best practices here on planting. Hey, so one of the first things you want to do is think about your location. Obviously, you want to look at the plant you've selected. This is Ambelia radians. It's going to want full sun. It's going to want some water. So always, think about your location, number one. We've got those conditions here, so we think we've got the right placement. Second step you always want to do is call before you dig. So as a contractor, we're always going to call before we show up on a site to locate your utilities, your gas line, your electrical, your Comcast. The last thing you want to do, having a fun day out in the yard planting, is hit one of your utilities. So make sure you do that. It normally takes about 48 hours for them to come and clear your utilities. They'll mark it on the ground. It's a free service, 811. So make sure you've called your utilities in. Step two is look out for localized things. So in this yard, we've got a drip irrigation system. So the first thing you want to do is just pull back the bark dust and make sure you're not going to cut that in half. So figure out where you're working. Ideally, you have planned this project such that you don't have your bark dust down and you're actually just planting right in dirt, and then you bring the bark dust in at the end. Doesn't always work out that way. So if you're here and the bark's already done, just want to rake that back, get yourself room for your plant. And now we're ready to go to town. This particular yard was actually sheet mulched, so we had existing lawn throughout this yard, and instead of doing a conventional spray out with herbicides, what we did is we actually brought in a bunch of cardboard and we overlapped it. And so what you're going to find as we get in here is some of that cardboard is still breaking down, but we use that to sheet mulch over and kill that grass, and then we just use a lot of organic material on top of it. So that's what's kind of why you're seeing some cardboard here, which is a little unusual. So when we're thinking about digging our hole, we want our hole to be about twice the size, 1.5 to 2 times the size of the root ball that you're going to put in the ground. So here's a cool sign. We got some worm life. So this is one of the benefits of not using traditional herbicides, is our soil is still very much alive. So that's pretty cool. Good sign there. So this is a little bit anaerobic. It means that it's probably got a lot of clay in it, which is traditional around here. I can smell kind of a little bit of rotting material. So not our best conditions. Why that's important is you might think about what you're amending with. So you might come in with a compost or maybe something that's actually got some gravel in it so that you have a little bit better drainage in the bottom of this hole. All right, so we've gotten our hole dug. It's roughly 1.5 to 2 times as big as the plant we're putting in. And we're gonna get our plant ready. One thing, pay attention when you're planting. This is a pretty robust shrub. It's not gonna be super sensitive, but you never wanna yank this plant by, hold it by the top. You wanna have some delicacy. So when we're taking it out, if it's really root bound, you can press on the sides, try and get some air in there. And then we just wanna be kind of careful. These are living things, so we want to be delicate with them when we take them out. So one thing I'm looking at, this plant, it's growing in well. It's probably been in this pot, maybe a couple months. It's not super root bound, so one thing you're looking at, if the roots are really robust, if it's been in this pot way too long, you'll see roots actually girdling around. And if you aren't careful and you don't divide those up before you put it in the hole, then what'll happen over time is they'll just keep growing in a circle, and it'll actually choke and kill the plant. So one thing to do is have a little tool or knife, or even just take your hand and just break those roots up a bit. You don't want to tear it apart completely, but just delicately. I'm just kind of easily taking those apart, just kind of stressing them a little bit, and that's really all you need to do. So I mentioned this is pretty clay soil. I grabbed just a little bit of gravel here. This is quarter minus. Quarter 10 is actually ideal. But we're just going to mix that into the native soil here. And then, whatever soil medium you have, if you're going to amend with compost or whatever. In this case, we've already amended this soil. So we're just going to go ahead and plant directly in to the hole. So one thing to pay attention to at this point is level. You don't want to plant too deeply. You don't want to plant too high. here in Oregon we get a lot of wet weather, so you want a little bit of extra drainage. Right now this shrub's a little too low, so I'm just going to kick some native soil down in here. Go ahead and get this to the level I want it at. Perfect. So now we're sitting pretty. Couple quick tips here, especially I mentioned we're getting kind of late in the planting season. If you're trying to plant and it's getting extremely warm, you might just try and reschedule, but if for some reason you really want to plant and we're getting temperatures north of 70 degrees, there's some products and things you can do to try and give yourself the best possible scenario. The first thing I would say is look into products like Nature's Shield, which is basically going to reduce the amount of evapotranspiration that's coming out of these leaves. So it's basically going to shut down some of the pores, essentially, that the leaf is using to push out water. The root system's still going to take in just as much water as it always would, but the leaves will not be basically pushing that water out as often or as readily. So it's kind of a waxy substance that goes on. If you're applying that, you're basically going to keep applying it until you see it drip off the leaf. It's really intended more for larger trees and shrubs. If you put it on new foliage or small foliage, you're probably going to reduce how quickly it's going to grow, so you might kind of stunt the growth. So be careful with that. Definitely consult whoever you buy your fertilizers and amendments from, and get their best recommended practices on that. So that's something you can do before you get to this point. But the other thing I would recommend is a super saturation, and you can do that either directly in the hole that you're working with, or you can have a 5-gallon bucket to the side. But basically all you want to do is just fill this hole up with water. We're trying to really soak this root ball so that we're giving it its best shot. Now, as we mentioned, we've got clay soil here, so this is happening really fast. You might have a sandy loam at your home, or a soil that drains much better. So you might have to do this for a number of minutes. It might take 10 or 15 minutes. It may not even work in the hole. You may have to actually get a 5-gallon bucket and sit this plant in there. And what you're looking to see, eventually we'll see kind of water bubbling just a little bit on the sides. We're gonna let that sit in the water for, maybe 10, 15 minutes before we go to plant. So I always recommend watering in your plants, unless it's a plant that just, doesn't like a lot of water, maybe a sedum or succulent, but you always want to water in your plants, but especially when it's hot outside, this is a best practice I would recommend. All right, so the last step, the fun part, we're gonna fill this hole in. We've amended at this point. We've watered in the plant. This is a small plant, so we're not needing to stake it. On a tree, you'd probably have some tree stakes here. I'm breaking up this soil a little bit, just kind of placing it in here. We're probably gonna have a little bit extra soil than what we need in this instance. So what we'll do for that is we'll just use the pot the plant came out of, haul that away, or use it in a different part of the yard maybe. So now I'm gonna get down here, just gotta tamp this in. You don't want to compact too much. That's a common problem we see too. So just lightly, we want air around that root ball. Back to soil health and having some vitality there. If you pack this down too tightly, you can actually harm the plant's ability to move minerals and nutrients as well as air through its systems. So we're just kind of tamping this down, making sure it's secure. Like I said, we've got a little extra soil, so we'll have to clean that up, but then we'll bring our bark back in and we're done. On to the next 100.